where the moon lights.
An excellent day for an exorcism.
I'm your number one fan.
Hey up and welcome back to the Rate Scary podcast. My name is Scary Zara Mary and I am your host. And if you are new here, the premise of this podcast is to go subgenre by subgenre through horror. And for the past 12 weeks, I think it is, around about that, I have been doing a deep dive into one of my favourite subgenres, which is Gothic Horror. And we started off with a history of Gothic, where that has come from, talking about architecture, literature, theatre, before moving on to cinema. And then I've hand selected some what I believe to be iconic Gothic horror films to delve into. And I've done that over the past 12 weeks, joined by some guests along the way. Some of my very good friends, Celebro Sam, joined me for a couple of episodes. I had Sam from Horror Halloween in Home, who joined me, and also my bestie Rose. It's Rose Bish. And it's a sad day today. I feel like it's a sad day because it's coming up to time to move on to another subgenre, which is going to be torture, which I am really, really excited about, to be honest. I have quite a macabre interest in torture and pain generally. So be able to talk about that with relation to horror films, I am really looking forward to. And that'll kick off next week when I dig into some of the history of torture and where that has played a part in horror films. But before I do that, I thought it would be appropriate to wrap up this kind of Gothic horror chapter that I've found myself in, and I thought I would do that with a ranking. There are so many Gothic horror films in the subgenre, so many, and if I was to include all of them, I'd be here for a month recording this episode, so I'm not going to be able to do that. But I have handpicked 30 films that I'm going to categorize into 4 tiers. You'll have probably seen other podcasters do this. Slaughtered Lamb podcast and Darren from Mr. Sandsman does this all the time. Absolute professionals at this, and they do amazing 10-minute rankings. And I really don't think mine is going to be that speedy, but I am going to try and keep the discussion on each film fairly light. Otherwise, we are going to be here for hours. And I'm also conscious, I don't know how this is going to come across just on audio. So if it comes across poorly, switch over to YouTube and come and watch me rank these films instead. I'm going to really find it hard to put films in the 4th rank. I don't see any of these ranks as being terrible. So if I start off with rank 4, which is essentially the bottom rank, but I don't see films being bad put into this rank, I'm going to call that You Have Bewitched Me, which comes from Sleepy Hollow. The rank above that is number 3, and I'm going to call that I Am an Appetite, Nothing More, which comes from Nosferatu from 2024. Rank 2 is going to be Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously, which comes from The Witch, or The Witch, however you say it. And then rank 1 is I Love You Too Much to Condemn You, which comes from Bram Stoker's Dracula. So they are my 4 ranks, number 1 being the absolute elite, and number 4 being the lowest rank, but it's still going to be a lot of films that I absolutely love. So, let's get into it. I have got a list of films. I'm going to go through them alphabetically because that's just how my brain works. And I'm going to start off with a film called Black Sabbath, which is from 1963. It's the film that the band Black Sabbath named themselves after. It comes from Mario Bava. And this film has got 3 different stories, each with an introduction actually from Boris Karloff. So immediately that makes it a Gothic horror film. But the 3 stories that we've got are The Telephone, which is about a woman who is tormented by this stalker. You've then got The Vaudelac, where a man comes home after killing a monster. And then you've got The Drop of Water, which is where a nurse steals a ring from a corpse and then is haunted by the ghost of that corpse. So a nice little kind of mini anthology, which you don't see often in Gothic horror. Iconic because you've got Boris Karloff in there. And I'm going to put that at, rank 3. I am an appetite, nothing more. I'm then going to move on to Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992. You'll have heard myself and my buddy Celebro last week talking about this film because it is his favourite film of all time, one of his favourites. This is Francis Ford Coppola, visually absolutely orgasmic, I would say stunning. A real reimagining of Bram Stoker's tale of Vlad Tepes. It really brings out this subtext of sexual repression. It's got a stellar cast, despite Keanu Reeves' accent, like we talked about. Aiko Ishioka won an Oscar for costume design for this film, which is where Coppola plugged all his money into. So many iconic quotes. You know, I've crossed oceans of time to find you. That's one of the reasons why Gary Oldman took the role of Dracula, was so then he could say that quote. And I don't see how I can not put this into I Love You Too Much to Condemn You, rank number 1. We've then got Bride of Frankenstein from 1935. This has to be one of the best sequels ever made. We've got Elsa Lanchester as the bride. She looks, I mean, everyone knows Bride of Frankenstein. When they think Bride of Frankenstein, they think of her. And that makeup that Jack Pierre did, she looks beautiful, haunting, terrifying, deer in the headlights. She truly embedded herself as an icon in Universal's catalogue of monsters. So I think I am going to put this into rank number 2, Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously? Next up, a bit of a weird film, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is from 1920. It's one of the earliest horror films. It's a silent German expressionistic horror film, and it falls into the Gothic subgenre. I studied this at sixth form, and when I did media studies, and I had zero clue what's going on. I've rewatched the film a number of times since all those years ago, and I kind of know what's going on, but at the same time, it's nuts. It's really weird. I would probably encourage anyone just to go and watch it just to see what I'm talking about. But it's a story of a hypnotist who uses a somnambulist, a sleepwalker, to commit murders. It's very dark. It's very weird. So I don't think I can put it in one of my top tiers for that in mind. I'm going to put it as rank 3. I am an appetite, nothing more. We then have Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter. This is a Hammer film. It's from 1974. It's definitely one of Hammer's more iconic films. Probably one of my favourites as well. It's recently had a re-release, deservedly so. And it's really sad actually about the recent loss of Horst Janssen, who of course depicted Captain Kronos. It's a lot of fun, this film, but I don't think it is quite as iconic as some of the other films that I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to put it into rank 4. You Have Bewitched Me. Then Crimson Peak from 2015. So like I said, myself and my very good friend Sam from Horror Halloween and Home, we discussed this at length. It's got a wonderful cast with Tom Hiddleston, Jessica Chastain, Mia Wasikowska. It's created by Guillermo del Toro, who is an absolute master when it comes to Gothic horror, and it tells the story of Edith, who falls in love with Thomas and relocates to his mansion. She meets his sister, Lucille, and seems to be protecting this dark secret and is haunted by some ghosts at Crimson Peak. It's gorgeous. I loved talking about this with Sam because she opened my eyes up to a lot more about the film that I hadn't picked up on. Some really wonderful themes. The costuming is amazing. Excellent set pieces in there as well. It's chilling and also enchanting at the same time. So I probably actually, prior to talking to Sam about Crimson Peak, I would have put this at rank 2, but I am going to put it at rank 1. I love you too much to condemn you. Next is Dark Shadows. So there's going to be a lot of mention of Johnny Depp as we go through these films and this ranking, because seemingly he is also a fan of Gothic horror. And even though that this is Gothic horror, it has an awful lot of fun and charm and humour and quite a lot of lightness to it. But we do have themes of romance, of death, vengeance, curses, all of the really great ingredients to make a fine modern Gothic horror. It isn't my favourite. If I was to think of all of the Gothic horror films that Johnny Depp has starred in, that Tim Burton has been involved in, definitely not my favourite, but that doesn't mean it's bad. So I'm going to put it at rank 4. You Have Bewitched Me. Next, we have the first of a couple of Dracula films that I'm going to talk about, because how can you not? And it makes sense for me to talk about Dracula from 1931. Bela Lugosi will forever be my Dracula. His performance as the Count set the standard. When you think of Dracula, it is his Dracula that you have in mind. And Children of the Night, what music they make. Iconic. I have Bela Lugosi tattooed on the inside of my arm. I love him forever. I love the parts that he played in Universal Monsters back catalogue. He starred in so many of their films. I loved him in The Wolfman as well. I don't think this is a perfect film on rewatch. I think it's stunning, but I think it has aged quite poorly. I mean, it's nearly 100 years old, this film, so I have to bear that in mind. But is it something that I regularly go back and rewatch? No, it isn't. So I'm going to place it at rank 2. Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously? Another Dracula film that I want to talk about is Dracula from 1958. This is another Hammer horror film. They were brilliant. They still are brilliant at reimagining Gothic tales. In fact, they've got a new horror film that's going to be coming out called Ithaca, which I'm very excited about, especially if you go and look at what an Ithaca is. And I think Christopher Lee as Dracula is almost as iconic as Bela Lugosi. He certainly brings a different flair to the role, which I enjoy. He looks far more menacing than I think Bela does. And in that, I think he probably loses some of the romanticism that Dracula needs. So I love this version. Like I said, it's difficult to put any films into the 4th rank, but I am going to do it with this one. So this is You Have Bewitched Me for Dracula from 1958. Okay, going back to Universal, another one that I absolutely loved. There'll be a common theme here. If I love a film, I tend to have a tattoo of it. And James Whale's Frankenstein, I have the monster on my arm, Boris Karloff's monster. And I just think that this iteration of Frankenstein has influenced all other Frankenstein films that have followed. The monster will forever be my favourite. He isn't really frightening anymore, I don't think, but I think perhaps that's because I think the story is so beautiful and heartbreaking. So I am going to put Frankenstein from 1931 at rank 2. Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously? Another Johnny Depp film from 2001, From Hell. I think this is a severely underrated Gothic horror. In fact, it's a severely underrated horror. It's a severely underrated film. I'm surprised more people don't talk about this. And I'm also surprised that there aren't more films that depict Jack the Ripper that I'm aware of. I personally love this film. It's an 18 in the UK. It's brutal, it's grim, it's dark, it's macabre. And it's probably one of my favourite ever Johnny Depp performances, actually. But I am going to place it at rank 3, which is I Am an Appetite, Nothing More. Another one that I never hear anyone talking about, and it's probably because it's a little bit older, it's from 1944, but it's called Gaslight, and it is where the term gaslighting comes from, because it is about a man who torments his wife by stealing her items, but then accusing her of forgetting where she put them, so making her believe that she's losing her mind. It is very much a psychological thriller, but it also falls into the horror subgenre, especially Gothic horror, because he makes their home really haunting. Like, she believes at points that she is being haunted. And this picked up 7 Oscar nominations at the time. Ingrid Bergman won for Best Actress for this film. So again, surprised that this isn't talked about more, especially for the term that has coined, gaslighting. But I am going to put that at rank 4 because it's one that I've only seen once. I really enjoyed it. But rank 4, You Have Bewitched Me. Then have another one that is a little bit older from 1960, which is House of Usher. So you might have watched Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix from a year or two ago. This again comes from Edgar Allan Poe's story. Roger Corman is behind this. Vincent Price stars in this. Corman adapted a number of Edgar Allan Poe's films. This is one of Poe's best ever stories, and I think this film does an excellent job of immortalising that. Brilliant cinematography, a real classic. So I am going to place that at number 3. I Am an Appetite, Nothing More. One that is a little bit more recent, albeit it's still 30 years old, Interview with a Vampire from 1994. So we've got Tom Cruise and we've got Brad Pitt. Again, stunning to look at, particularly from a costuming perspective. I'm sure it got nominations for Academy Awards. I think it's a really lovely adaptation of Anne Rice's modern horror classic. The sexual undertones in this are absolutely delicious. I haven't watched the TV series yet. I have got it on my watch list. I always feel like this film feels longer than it actually is. And so for that reason, I am going to put it at number 3, I Am an Appetite, Nothing More. Jumping back to the 60s and another one of Edgar Allan Poe's tales, Masque of Red Death from 1964. Edgar Allan Poe is one of the kings of Gothic horror stories, particularly stories that really inflict the soul, and he really created a nightmarish world with this story, helped in part by the direction from Roger Corman again, and also again starring Vincent Price. It's not one of my favourites. I have seen this a couple of times though, simply because I absolutely love Vincent Price. So I'm going to place this at number 2, Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously? Okay, now for Nosferatu's. We've got a few here to go through. So I'm going to start off first of all with Nosferatu from 1922. Iconic. Thank God all of the copies of this film were not burned so that we have this today. And so also we have the later versions that have been created. I did a rewatch of this ahead of seeing the 2024 version of Nosferatu and ahead of myself and my buddy Sam talking about Nosferatu. I actually found it, I think the cinematography is fantastic. The way that they played with shadows in the film is brilliant. But I found the film more funny to me than scary, I think, because you see Nosferatu trotting around with his little, well, it's not little, quite a big coffin under his arm. It's still legendary. It's got a place in time. It's got a place in history. But like I said, it's probably not one of my favourite versions now. and I'm going to place that at rank number 3. I Am an Appetite, Nothing More. We then have Nosferatu the Vampire from 1979. So this is Werner Herzog's direction. Very unique directorial style. We've got Klaus Kinski starring. It's probably my least favourite Nosferatu film, and that doesn't mean that it isn't good, but it just isn't up there for me. And I think, unfortunately, the one that we'll talk about in a second tops it for me. So I am going to place this at rank 4, which is You Have Bewitched Me, because I still love it. But the Nosferatu film that I love the most, and I have talked about this extensively, not just in an episode with Celebro, but I've probably dropped it into conversation at least once in every other episode since. This is Robert Eggers' Nosferatu from 2024/2025. The Academy Awards have just been on. I am gutted that it didn't even pick up one award, because I think this film is perfection. I know it's not for everyone, but as someone who loves Gothic horror, the way that this looks, the way that they've adapted the story, making use of Lily Rose Depp in the film and seeing the story play out through her eyes. The makeup and practical effects in this film, the use of lighting, the use of real fire, coloured lenses, production design. I will forever love this film. I cannot wait to watch the extended version. I'm very excited. So obviously, if you haven't guessed by now, I'm going to place this in rank 1, which is I Love You Too Much to Condemn You. Moving on to a film that I talked about in my very, very first episode, and that is Rebecca from 1940. So this is directed by Alfred Hitchcock. This is a film that is adapted from Daphne du Maurier's book, also titled Rebecca. Hitchcock is, as we know, a master of suspense, and I think it makes sense for him to have done this film. I'm surprised actually he didn't do more Gothic horror tales, because his style of direction would really lend itself to the subgenre, because he manages to create real psychological unrest. We see a woman marrying a man who's very wealthy and moving into his estate, but then she is haunted by his first wife. There's definitely a lot of psychological elements at play here. I think he did a fantastic job of this. Again, probably not one of my favourite Gothic horror films, but still fantastic. So I am going to place it at number 4, You Have Bewitched Me. Now, another of Tim Burton / Johnny Depp's Gothic horror tales, and one that I have talked about on this show with my friend Rose, and that is Sleepy Hollow from 1999. We have Johnny Depp as Ichabod Crane, who is a policeman from New York, from the city, who needs to figure out the legend of Sleepy Hollow, this Dutch Pennsylvania town, very religious, where people's heads are being lobbed off. And I think that this film strikes a wonderful blend of terror and romance and humour. It's very beautiful to look at. I love the way that it's shot. I love the colouring. I think it's wonderfully saturated, and me and Rose talked at length about this. Some of the special effects that are used are a bit weird now, some of the CGI that's in there, so I am going to place it at rank number 2, Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously. Before we move on to any other films, I think this is the last Johnny Depp Gothic horror film that I'm going to talk about. Sweeney Todd, Demon Barber of Fleet Street from 2007. This might be a musical, but it is still Gothic horror. Like I said, it's one of many that Johnny Depp has starred in. I really enjoy this. I often forget about it when it comes to Gothic horror, I think probably due to the fact that it is a musical, but I love the music, the songs that are in this. I really enjoy Sacha Baron Cohen in this, Helena Bonham Carter, Alan Rickman, the guy from Stranger Things, Jamie Campbell Bower. I think it's an amazing lineup in terms of cast. Again, very dark. I love the redness of the blood that is in this film. There are a couple of songs in there that I find a bit cringy, and I'd be interested actually to see a Sweeney Todd that isn't a musical, that is perhaps a lot darker, maybe along the same lines as From Hell, from that angle. So I am going to place it at number 3. I Am an Appetite, Nothing More. So I think we're on the home stretch now. I think we've just got 10 more films to cover off. And we're going to go in with Suspiria from 1977, which I think a lot of people often think as a giallo film, which it is in parts, but it is also a brilliant Gothic horror story. It is set in a German dance school with a supernatural secret hidden in its walls. It's got bundles of this slow burning unease that is iconic to Gothic horror. It is a lot of fun. It's got real shock and terror in there. I enjoy the remake as well, but I've not included it as part of this ranking because I think the original from 1977 lends itself to Gothic horror more. But I am going to place this one at number 3. Moving on by a few years to 1980, and we have The Changeling. So this is Peter Medak's classic. It takes into account every possible Gothic trapping and provides a real sense of the supernatural and, like I've mentioned, this sense of dread throughout. I think George C. Scott is brilliant as John Russell. The film is haunting, it's eerie, it sticks with you. That fucking ball that bounces down the stairs, horrendous. Do I still find it as terrifying now as I did maybe when I watched it a number of years ago? No, but that's probably because I'm a little more hardened when it comes to being a horror fan. But I am going to place it at rank 2. Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously? Then we have another Guillermo del Toro film, his first ghost film, which is The Devil's Backbone from 2001. This is it's set in a Spanish orphanage at the turn of the Civil War, at the very close of it. Very, very deepening themes of war alongside cultural grief. I feel like this film can be somewhat forgettable, especially with Crimson Peak thrown in the mix in the context of this ranking. So there's no way that I can place it in a high ranking. I think it's still very beautiful, as all of Guillermo del Toro's films are, but certainly not my favourite. It's not one that I've gone back to and rewatched. So I am going to place it at number 3. I Am an Appetite, Nothing More. We're going to do 2 films back to back from the 60s. So first of all, The Haunting from 1963. And this is adapted from the novel Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Again, you might have watched the series on Netflix. That is also adapted from the same novel by Shirley Jackson. So it is a story of an evil house, but it also features a paranormal researcher, a clairvoyant, the heir of the manor, a very emotionally damaged lead, and the film never aims to question the existence of the supernatural. It is just a given in this film. The scares are super high. Like I rewatched this, I think it was around Christmas time. They were showing it on the TV, and I really enjoyed rewatching it actually. Given that it is quite old now, I thought it was still very scary, and Martin Scorsese actually named this as the scariest film he has ever seen. So I am going to place The Haunting from 1963 at rank number 2. Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously? And then if we just jump back by a couple of years to 1961, we have The Innocents, which I think is another scary film. It's another film that's adapted from a novel from Turn of the Screw. And I think that this is an absolute masterpiece by Jack Clayton. It really brings discomfort to another level. You are constantly wondering what is lurking in the shadows, thanks to the fantastic cinematography and real depth of shadows. Real themes of sexuality and also themes of past versus present. I'm going to place this as rank 3. I Am an Appetite, Nothing More. coming up to more recent years, The Invitation from 2022. I thought this was okay. I didn't go see it at the cinema just because the trailers didn't really appeal to me. I knew it was Gothic Horror from the trailers, but I wasn't immediately drawn to it, so I did watch it at home. I felt like it was trying to be a little bit Crimson Peak, and it's heavily inspired by Dracula as well. It follows a woman who, after her mother's death, meets long lost family members and discovers the secrets that they carry. I didn't get the impression that this film really knew what it wanted to be. I don't feel like it had real clear direction, which is a shame because I thought it was very nice to look at. By no means as gorgeous as the likes of Crimson Peak or Bram Stoker's Dracula. So I am going to place it at number 4, You Have Bewitched Me. And now we're on to the final 3. So thanks for sticking with me if you've got it to this point. But the next one I want to talk about is The Others from 2001. So you're going to find with these final 3, actually, I have covered them all in episodes on this podcast. So do go back and listen to them. I covered the Others. This is a classic British ghost story. It stars Nicole Kidman as a mother who is struggling to raise her children, in part due to some sort of ghostly presence that is haunting them in their stately home. This film is still relatively new to me. My husband was shocked and appalled that I had never watched it and told me that I needed to, and I did, and I immediately fell in love with it. And I think it is absolutely terrifying in parts. The writing is fantastic. I'm surprised we haven't seen more from this director when it comes to Gothic horror. I am going to place it at rank 2, Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously? Speaking of Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously? The Witch from 2015. So another iconic Robert Eggers film. Again, one that I've covered on the podcast, so make sure you go back and check that out. It is bleak. This film is so bleak. It's probably the bleakest out of the ones that I've covered on this list. It's about a family who have been cast out of their community. They've been forced to live on the edge of a forest when one day their infant child disappears, their crops fail, and soon they start to point fingers at each other as to who exactly could be the cause of their downfall. Oh, I love this film so much. It is another that I have a tattoo of. I have a big old black fillet tattoo on my leg which says, Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously? So therefore, there's no other place that I can put it other than rank 1, I Love You Too Much to Condemn You. And then finally, what a great note to end on. This isn't done intentionally, this is done alphabetically, but the final film I want to talk about is The Woman in Black. So yes, another one that I have covered on the podcast. This is one of my favourite films of all time. So it's going to be no surprise where I rank it. I think this is the perfect ghost story. No notes. It's perfect. I think whether you read the book, whether you see the theatre production, whether you watch the TV film, whether you watch this 2012 iteration, they're all my favourites. I will love them forever. And I do talk about them on my episode. But this iteration in particular with, this is a Hammer film actually, with Daniel Radcliffe. This is about a vengeful ghost that has encountered loss and grief. And it shows no mercy. I think this film is beautifully executed. It still terrifies me now. I still have to make a conscious decision to put this film on when I am in the mood for being scared. The audiobook made my eyes water because I was so terrified. The same thing happens when I go and watch the theatre production. So obviously I am going to place The Woman in Black at number 1. I Love You Too Much to Condemn You. So that is it. All 30 films there that I have gone through as a ranking. So if we go through rank by rank, at number 4, which is You Have Bewitched Me, we have Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter from 1974, Dark Shadows from 2012, Dracula from 1958, Gaslight from 1944, Nosferatu the Vampire from 1979, Rebecca from 1940, and The Invitation from 2022. If we then look at rank 3, which is I Am an Appetite, Nothing More, we have Black Sabbath from 1963, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from 1920, From Hell 2001, House of Usher 1960, Interview with a Vampire 1994, Nosferatu 1922, Sweeney Todd Demon Barber of Fleet Street from 2007, The Devil's Backbone from 2001, The Innocents from 1961. And then rank 2, Wouldst Thou Like to Live Deliciously? So just below the top rank, Bride of Frankenstein from 1935, along with both Dracula and Frankenstein from 1931, Mask of Red Death from 1964, Sleepy Hollow from 1999, Suspiria from 1977, The Changeling from 1980, The Haunting from 1963, and The Others from 2001. And then my very top rank, I Love You Too Much to Condemn You, which I've reserved for a select few, Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992, Crimson Peak 2015, Nosferatu 2024, The Witch 2015, and The Woman in Black 2012. All films that I've covered on this podcast, so it's no surprise they fall into that top category, but they are the ones that I see as the ultimates when it comes to Gothic horror. So thank you very much for sitting with me through that ranking. I've really enjoyed doing it. It's allowed me to go back and revisit some films that I hadn't thought about for a little while, that I hadn't watched in a little while. But that does very nicely bring this Gothic chapter to a close, and it is of course time to move on to another subgenre, like I said at the beginning, which I'm very, very excited about. I'm going to be talking about torture films. So think Saw franchise, Hostel films, American Mary, Martyrs. Those are the kind of films that I'm going to be talking about. I would love it. Please come and tell me on my socials if there is a torture film that you would love me to talk about, because I haven't recorded all of the episodes yet, and I'd love to be able to talk about your favourite film. So do come and find me online. I am at Rate Scary on YouTube and Instagram, and at Scary Zara Mary on TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads, and Letterboxd. So do come and find me and chat to me on my posts, or just drop me a message. I would love to talk to you about film. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I can't wait to get stuck into torture. Whoever thought they'd say that as a phrase. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you with this then. I'll see you soon.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
I'll be right back.
Game over. It's all for you.
Beware the moonlights.
An excellent day for an exorcism.
I'm your number one fan.